Okay. Well, I hope you are. I've got for some of you, that's the only exercise you've gotten today, right there, twisting. I am super excited to see all of you. Cesario, glad to have you here. You guys are from all over. Looks like you're heavy in the Florida land today on our particular webcast. Stay safe would be the big thing I tell you down in Florida. It's from what we're reading on the news here in Alabama, it doesn't look great. So definitely stay safe. Did I? Maybe I shouldn't be giving a webinar today because my mouth is super lazy. So um, I'm going to do my best to talk to you about feedback, just to give people just a few more seconds to come in. If you have not told us where you are listening from in sometimes the world, I've had my friend Michael come all the way from France sometimes. If you want to tell us where you're listening from today, just to eat up a little bit more time, or how you're feeling, how about this? Give me if you've already told us where you're listening from, give us an emoticon of how you're feeling, an emoji, an emoticon, that little smiley face down in the bottom. How you feeling today? Awesome. Oh, Justine, so cool. Chris is bang, killing it. I love it. Oh man. Everybody's looks like you're in a pretty good mood today. That's great. Awesome. Feeling good, feeling cool. Glad to have you here with all from you all over the country. Again, hope you are staying safe and that your friends and family are well. And yeah, this is weird. I mean, guys, when we started doing this back in March, well, in January, really, could you have possibly thought we'd still be doing this? Of course, we were going to do webinars no matter what at Gen Y, but the importance of webinars, I think, has gone up significantly since all this happened. So maybe we were just a little ahead of the curve. Who knows? But today we are going to talk about feedback and giving feedback. So my question for you here in the chat box from the outset is, when you give feedback, is that uncomfortable for you? How do you feel about giving feedback to another individual? And I'm not talking about your kids, all right? We have no problem ripping into our children. I'm talking about when you've got another person, coworker, maybe somebody that you're in charge of, or somebody that maybe is in charge of you that you need to give some feedback on. How do you feel when you have to give feedback? Is this something that's fine for you, or is it something that causes panic or irritation, or how do you feel when it's feedback time? Write that in the chat box for me. Yeah, like you can't be honest about certain topics. So it's interesting, Sam, because it's almost like we've gotten to this point where if we say anything negative, we're bad people. And this is so see Harmony says as long as it's positive, right? Um concerned about expressing the right tone, especially if it's written. Justine, I think you're hitting a really interesting point here, because when it's written, you're at the mercy of the other people. And now, as we're doing more and more virtual trainings, if you don't have voice or you don't have face, and you're depending heavily on email or even like program management software, it can go south really fast because people read your words with your voice in their head, right? And it can be swayed depending on how we're feeling that day, right? So let's say I get an email from my boss and I'm already feeling like maybe I feel like overwhelmed that day. Right. I'm like, oh, poor, pitiful me. Everybody hates me. And then I get an email on that particular day with something that needs to be changed. Well, I'm more likely to feel like that's adding on, it's piling on to the poor, pitiful me. Right. But I think Gilda really hits the main thing that we're going to focus on today, is that you need to be prepared and choose your words carefully when you are giving feedback. So some of you have heard this metaphor before, but I'm going to hit it again with you because I think it's one of my absolute favorites. This is from my good friend Les Studeman. She is a softball coach and has been for about 30 years for Division II softball. And what she says is that um, there are certain people that are thoroughbreds, right? And if you put a whip on a thoroughbred, they will run faster. But then there are people who are donkeys, and if you put that whip on that donkey, they'll sit down. And what this really kind of comes down to is that different people are motivated in completely, totally different ways. For some people, and for those of you that remember watching Biggest Loser, you kind of had that dichotomy of the Bob and the Jillian, right? The Bob was always very super encouraging and positive. And then Jillian would be like, get off your butt and get it done. And I used to say, for me, from a management style, I needed a Jillian because if I was coddled in any way, I wouldn't give my full best. And so this is one of the big things you have to understand when you are communicating to whomever you need to give feedback on is what is their temperament? How do they respond to feedback and what sort of your approach? Now the problem is and I've said this all we've heard this all year up to this point, people like people that are like them. People like people that are like them. And so we have a tendency to speak our own preferred method of feedback to other people. So, for example, anyone who's been around me and knows me pretty well, Jane and Kevin will tell you, I'm fairly direct. I just don't spend a lot of time wasting on words, especially with people that I'm close to. And I never give negative feedback to somebody that I don't care about. Right? If I don't think it's going to help them in some way, I don't give them negative feedback. If I don't think it's going to help their relationship because I actually care about them. So the problem is that my tendency is to want to be very expedient and just be very direct. But there are certain people, right, that take that as aggression or an over assertiveness or a meanness. And so here's the thing, if I want to make sure that they actually change their behavior, it doesn't matter what my preferred style of feedback is. It matters what their preferred type of receiving is. And the only way you can do this is by having very open conversations with the people that you're managing, where you ask them. There's nothing wrong with asking someone how they prefer to get feedback. Many people can't quantify this, but if you want to be a great manager, you have to ask, right? There's nothing wrong with you asking for how people want to be spoken to. Things you need to know before we get too deep into this. Number one, common sense is not common. I'm pretty sure y'all are aware of that at this point in time. Some of the smartest people I know, those of you that are NASA contractors, you've seen this happen lots of times. Some of the smartest people I know are also the dumbest people I know. Can anybody resonate with that? Tell me there in your chat box. Do you know any people who are so smart they're dumb? You're like, "No?" Yeah, if you don't, then maybe you're that person. It's very you have to understand common sense isn't common. People aren't gonna always use it. Please don't list them, Kirk. You'll probably end up getting fired. But the bottom line is that everybody has a reason and a story for how they are the way that they are. And so it's important that you understand that what you are seeing is partway through a person's story, right? You don't, many of us, especially in a work environment, we don't know the front end of many people's stories. So it's what I tell my children all the time, no one's born mean, right? Things have happened over their life that have conditioned them to be lazy or apathetic or mean or hyper aggressive or needy. All of these things have happened before you. And so now you have to have at least enough grace, right? You have to have enough grace to understand that people have a story that happened before you and they got that way based on their story. Okay. And so people's reaction to feedback is usually a direct indicator, right? Is usually a direct indicator of how they took feedback when they were children, right? So I'll just give you an example. My mom taught gifted and talented first and second graders for 27 years. And it was right in the time of a lot of Dr. Spock sort of stuff was coming out and a lot of pedagogy that was all very tell your children they're great, swell, and wonderful every single second of the day. And my parents did that. Everything I did was the best thing in the world, right? And it was rah, rah, ree until I went to college. And then I suddenly realized that the whole world doesn't think I'm the best thing in the planet. And so what happened was, in many ways, not having a balance of feedback during my childhood, of having it one-sided, yay, 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 made me also almost freak out anytime anybody gave me anything negative. And for those of you that know about what I've talked about generationally, this is definitely something that we saw happen with those early millennials, is they were very flabbergasted by any kind of negative feedback. Of course, the opposite can be true. There are many people that have been told during their childhoods they'll never measure up and they'll never be the best, and so that develops this sort of apathy of, just get it done however it is. But I think it's important for you to know before you start talking about feedback that everybody has a story, right? And Sam has a great point. He says some people are very literal, and some people have extreme trouble with figurative speech. I 100% agree. Um, it's kind of like the example that I use is, if you let's say you're dating somebody and they're like, they really wanted to spend time with you that night, but you already had other plans, and so they cross their arms and they dramatically say, no, no, you're fine, go ride on out with your friends tonight, don't even bother, nope, just go on, right? um and then they come back and you're really mad. Why is it? And they will look at you dead in the face and say, well, you said that I could go out. You said it was fine, right? That's that literal level of speech, where you're like, yeah, but you didn't read all the nonverbal sarcasm that was dripping when I said that. So yeah, I think you've got people that have a hard time, and some of this is personality, and some of this is background. But when it comes to any kind of feedback, the only person that you have control over is you. You can't control how another person is going to respond. You can control how much you prepare, and you can control how level you stay. Okay. And that's what we're going to focus on here today. Again, and I've told you guys this before, you've probably heard it. It is perfectly acceptable for you to have a thought come into your head and it never actually come out of your mouth. Every single bit of feedback that you want to say doesn't necessarily need to be said, right? Big thumbs up if you agree with that. There are people that just seem to, it pops in their head and it comes out of their mouth, and you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. Nobody really needed your opinion on that, right? So, one of the things I want you thinking about before you give feedback to another person is, do they really even need this? Do they even really need the feedback that I'm about to give them? Will it actually change things? Example, annoying people don't know they're annoying. You telling them they're annoying isn't probably going to change their level of annoyingness. But on the other side of that is, loud people are perfectly aware of the fact that they're being loud. You telling them they're loud is not going to change it. So if you're going to give feedback to another person, it needs to be based around something that could ever actually be changed in that individual. Okay. So when we're giving feedback, we want to use this sort of think. Print this out, put it wherever you need to. Think before you have a conversation with somebody. The first is it true? We've talked about in conflict resolution the idea of, we tell ourselves stories, right? We tell ourselves a villain, victim, and helpless story. And so sometimes we think things are true that aren't necessarily true. So make sure you check it. Make sure it's before you confront somebody on and give them feedback. Make sure you know if it ever even actually happened, or if it's complete hearsay. Okay. Is it true? Is it helpful? Is it going to help this other person in any way change their life for the better? Is it going to make it a smoother working environment? Is it going to make the project more effective? What is it? How is it going to help this individual by giving them this information? Is it inspiring? Does it make, is it a upper or a downer, right? Does it make, when in the way that you give people feedback, does it make them want to change, or does it make them feel negatively and bad about themselves? So look for ways to be inspiring. Is it necessary? Our tendency is, especially in American culture, we have a tendency to catch everything that's wrong and let things that are right go by us, right? We harp on things that are negative. So, for example, let's say that you go and spend the night in a hotel. If you have a really negative experience at that hotel, you are more likely to post a review than you are if you have a very positive experience on that hotel, right? We're naturally geared towards at this point in time to find errors and flaws. And I'll use my husband as an example. The thing that makes him so good at seeing errors and flaws as someone who is in supply chain management, right? That is also the thing that makes him see errors and flaws in all the people around him, right? So he notices because he can look at a spreadsheet and see 1,000 numbers and see one thing wrong, right? It makes him also do that in our house, right? So we can do 1,000 things right, and then that one bowl is left out, and that is wrong. So sometimes it's built into a person's personality and even their giftings to some degree to see the negative more frequently than they see the positive, or see the positive more frequently than they do the negative. I'm definitely sort of a blue skies person, right? I feel like it's all going to work out, it's all going to be fine, and let's just do this. And so make sure that you know the person that you're talking to, and is it necessary to even do this. And then the big thing that I would say is it kind? Can you give the feedback in a way that is kind and level headed? And what I have found is the number one way to make sure that someone feels like it's kind is when you associate it with wanting them to stay at a company. So for, let's say, you say, let's say somebody's made a pretty big error on a report, right? So you got to give them feedback on that. If you want it to be received well in a kind way, you would say something like, look, I want you to stay with this contract. I think you're a good employee. I think you've made a crappy mistake here that we've got to fix, but I really want you to stay. So this is some of the things that you can do to make it easier for you in the future, maybe some double checks, things like that. So there are ways when you meet that core need of another individual, of making them feel appreciated and respected and needed. When you meet those needs, then you can then give them almost any feedback in the world. Okay, but you got to meet the need first. All right. So when you are giving feedback, I want you to consider these sort of things also. How are you sitting or standing? Okay, so listen to me. Don't if you are talking to another person, you don't want to give negative feedback while standing up and the other person is sitting. Okay. Almost all feedback is considered slightly more negative when there is a height differential. So if you're going to be giving feedback, positive or negative, okay, you want to do your best to be sitting and be eye to eye with that individual as much as possible. So that's the first thing, is the level, because it immediately becomes distorted once your eye levels are not the same. Okay. So is it more expedient? No. Is it more comfortable? No. But that's definitely something that for you to work on. If they're standing, then you can absolutely give them feedback standing. Okay. Then I want you to pay attention to your arms. All right. So, and I know we've talked about this in nonverbal communication. We'll talk about it more as the year goes on. But, crossing your arms sends a signal to other people. If you have to put a actual blockade between you and another person, it usually shows either defensiveness or aggression. Okay. So you want to be careful about crossing your arms when you're giving this feedback. Really stay open as much as possible. Shoulders out, open. Don't clench your hands. Don't do a lot of pointing. Right. This is one of the things that Americans are not so good at. We point a lot when we're talking to make a point. We make a literal point. And so when you point a lot when you're talking, it's usually perceived more aggressively, and it's because it's usually more of a parent to child interaction when you point. So avoid pointing, avoid a lot of arm crossing, slumping of the shoulders. And please don't ever give feedback to another person with your hands behind your head. I've seen people that will literally lay back, put their feet up on the desk, and put their hands behind their head. That's just so yucky. Okay. So pay really close attention. Make sure you have an extreme open posture as much as possible when you are giving any kind of feedback to another individual. The next is, how loud or how tense are you? right? So Sam brings a point in here. You also have to understand how the mistake was made and determine if the mistake could have been made by another person, right? And that comes down to that level of true. Sam, we were talking about, is it true? Are you accusing the wrong person, the wrong department, right? Feedback can be focused on providing a general remedy and away from the person. On the whole, as much as possible, you want to give feedback to the problem, not the person. Okay. So you want to address how the problem can be fixed more frequently than you want to talk about how the person needs to fix the problem. Okay. Let's move back. That's an excellent point, Sam. How loud or how tense are you? This is a big deal. So I'm a loud person. I'm a loud person. And when I am having to give one-to-one feedback, I really, really have to work on, before I even start talking to the other individual, lowering my tone of voice, coming down, making sure I sound almost more monotone in the style. And then, of course, your tension shows a lot in your face. So around your jawline, the squeeze between your eyebrows. Make sure that you've got a more, as much as you can to relax. So I know we talked about when we talked about that idea of conflict resolution, we talked about the idea of unhooking and going to do something physical. If you've missed that, you can go back and watch those videos because you guys are all members. So you can go back and watch that video if you've missed it. But the idea of doing something physical to get extra energy off of you before you have to give negative feedback is a really good idea. But if you're naturally loud, do your best to bring that down. Um, because people naturally mimic. And so if you don't want the other person to get loud, then you can't be loud. And then another thing to consider is what's going to happen before or what will happen after. So let's say you've been in a 2-hour meeting and then you're going to give negative feedback to somebody. That person's already worn out. So give them a little bit of a replenishment break before you give any kind of feedback, right? Unless it's positive. If it's positive and you've had 2 hours and everybody's exhausted, boy, give them that positive and pump them up. But if you're going to have to give a negative style feedback, give them a break to decompress. Um, 2 hours of listening to anything is too long, right? So make sure that you are thinking about that. The other thing is, if you have just, let's say you had to give negative feedback to somebody and now you're about to go be in a meeting with them for 2 hours, that also can become very uncomfortable. So think about the timing of the day when it's smartest for you to be giving this feedback to that other individual. Um, Also, okay, so consider time of day. Let's talk about this. So, there are three different times, right? Friday afternoon. So here's the problem. So this is why people wait until Friday afternoon to give pink slips. Um, but here's the problem when it's just feedback. You give them all weekend to stew, right? They have extra days to be able to um play your words over and over in their mind without your clarification. So sometimes having too big of a gap is not necessarily going to be the best choice. Okay, so let's talk about time of day. People are better at different times of day. So I'm going to let you right here in your chat. There are three different levels. The first one is called a sparrow. Okay, these are people who are good usually early in the morning. Usually, most sparrows by 3 p.m. are worthless. Like we're done for the day. They're usually early risers and peter out as the day goes on. Okay, so that's sparrow. The opposite extreme of that is the owl. These are people that are better in the evening. Okay, so when they come to work, it's usually around 10, 11 when they get rolling good, and then they're really rolling good in the evening. And unfortunately, previously the American workplace was not in any way set up to accommodate this particular circadian rhythm, right? They not at all, because you had to get up at 8 or 7 or whatever it was and be there. But now with the advent of having more virtual work, these owls are finding that they can hit their stride at the time of day that is best for them. And then there are people. This is a stupid name, but what they call it, sprowl, SPROWL. The sprowl is usually good from about 10 a.m. to 5. They're not a morning person and they're not an evening person. They're the middle of the day person. So if you had to categorize yourself, where would you put yourself? Are you a sparrow, early morning person? Are you an owl, evening person? Or are you a sprowl right there in the middle? Let's see. Sparrows, sparrows, sparrows. Oh, look at all the sparrows. Interesting. Bear. There's Justine, a sparrow. Mm-hmm. Right? So lots of sparrows. That's pretty interesting. So here's the thing. One of the things that I've noticed with sparrows is many times you guys will start working as soon as you can so that you can get the rest of your day, quote unquote, back. Um, so sometimes sparrows are rolling at 6 o'clock in the morning. They're rolling. They're hitting their stride. And they've been up processing the world for 4 hours before that happens. 5 a.m. to 4 p.m. Yep, Mark, you're going to be a sparrow. Okay. So here's the thing. You have to know the person that you're giving feedback to, whether they are going to be a sparrow, an owl, or a sprowl. Okay. And here's why. At different times of the day, you are more willing to receive feedback. Okay. So, for example, if my husband says, "Hey, what are we going to have for dinner today?" and he asks me that at 8 o'clock in the morning, I don't have a problem. I'm very receptive to that and I might think about it. If he asks, "Hey, what are we going to have for dinner at 6 p.m.?" I'm like, whatever your hands can make. Right. I'm over. I'm done for the day mentally. I don't need to be making any decisions or changing any behaviors by 6. So this is one of the important things for you to know is that the people that you are having to give feedback on, what time of the day are they the best? Your sparrows are going to be more receptive to feedback in the early part of the day. Your owls are going to be more receptive in the afternoon. I mean, in the later part of the day. Just makes sense. So consider that. Don't just do. Remember, people like people that are like them. So we have a tendency to work like we do. Who is around? Okay, so you cannot hear me if they are over 55 years of age. We're gonna deem them a boomer. Okay, you cannot give negative feedback to a boomer with other people around. Do not call out a boomer publicly ever. It will get real fast. Okay. I have found that boomers are very receptive to private one-to-one feedback. They can take almost any level of negativity if it's one-to-one, but if you do it in front of other people, it's gonna get real bad real fast. They will get you. So be careful about giving it around other people. Millennials, we also see become more defensive. And this could be simply because of the size of those two, but nobody really likes to be called out in front of a large group of people. So really be careful about, you pray that this idea of you praise in public and you refine in private. So make sure that you're aware of who is around. How does their personality receive it? As someone who is a communications person, I'm good. You can give me pretty much any kind of negative feedback or positive feedback. And if I feel like you have my best interest at heart, it's going to work great. But their personality, you got to make sure especially we've seen. So I think you guys take the disc a lot, DIS. So those people that are the S's in particular, they are really, really averse to any kind of negative feedback, especially around other people. It's just harder for them because they're emotionally driven. Um, and so definitely be careful with those people. This is again why the more you know about your people, the better. And then, of course, their generation. Boomers usually can take very direct. We're going to talk about each one of these as we go on. Um, but all these things need to be considerations. Kurt says that Tritter works great, but I would definitely say no. Remember that all of your perspectives before you give feedback to another person are filtering through your own perspective of what makes something good or bad. So remember your own age, gender, part of the country, whether you were raised urban or rural, your race, your socioeconomic situation, education level, religion, political beliefs, all that's part of your story. All those things make someone's filter perspective. So remember, you are always dealing with other people's perspectives while you are giving feedback. Don't worry, I'm about to give it to you on how we can fix this. Okay. So most people go between these two extremes of give it to me straight or soften the blow. Um, in the deep south. So it's interesting because there's times where I don't want to categorize Florida as the deep south. I just don't, I just don't. But in the deep south where we are in Huntsville, I have found that it is difficult sometimes for people who have lived in other parts of the country to come to our weird norms, because we don't ever just say directly what we want. Right? So it's like I'll send you an email, but first I'm going to talk about my grandkid, I'm going to talk about my kitten, and oh my god, can you believe that meeting today? And then I'm going to ask you whatever it is that I need to ask you, and that doesn't seem very expedient. But we find that in particular in the South, there's this sort of need to soften the blow a little bit. They're just not as direct. Usually, you can go northeast, for example, and you can spit pretty much anything without having to soften it. And because you've got the norms of different parts of the country. So definitely consider that. Mark added here this idea of Northwest Florida is deep South, like lower Alabama, right? So you get this idea though that there's sort of a almost a game to be played in how you get this feedback. So for certain people, you're not going to be able to just sit down and just spit it, right? You're going to have to talk about some life related stuff, and then you can get to the hard stuff. So definitely think about that as you go along. Okay. So when you are working with boomers, as you know, I love the generational side of things. So let's talk about it this way. When you're working with boomers, you are here's how I would suggest you go about giving them feedback. The first thing you want to do is you need to have documentation. Okay. When you are working with boomers. So like they're going to say, well, show me, or when did I, or prove it. So document, document, document. And this is kind of a weird thing to even think about, but you know how there's certain people who are time sucks? You know what I mean by time sucks? Like they just every time you hang out, every time they come to your door, you're like, "Oh god, cuz this person's going to stand there for 45 minutes." So that sometimes you need to chart that, right? You've got to make sure that you have documentation of whatever it is you're going to confront somebody on. So whether that's having your own folder in your inbox of when they say snarky things, or documenting times, or writing down errors, dates and times seem to mean more to boomers when you are giving them any kind of negative feedback. The next thing you want to focus on is how this feedback is a growth opportunity. How can this get them ahead? Um, in my experience, there are boomers still climbing the ladder. Okay. And so you want to make sure that you phrase this in a way of here's how this can help you, not just in your relationships, but help your success. Maybe it can be you get more money, or you get to lead more people, or whatever it is. But make sure you focus on how this can get them ahead. And then your feedback frequency needs to be based on how confident you feel with the person giving feedback. Okay, so when boomers like you, for lack of a better term, when they respect you, let's go with that one, you can up your level of feedback. When they don't respect you, you have to lower your level of feedback. So what I mean by this is not the type of information that you're sharing, it's the frequency at which you share. Okay. So if you already know that you've got someone who is 55 plus and they already have a weird beef for you that you may or may not know why, um, you're not going to need to give them feedback as frequently. What you're going to do is clump that together, bunch it. So when you give feedback, you need to give it in larger amounts. Does that make sense? So you're when you sit down to give them feedback, you're going to give that maybe everything they've done over the course of the month, right? Not every other day, or once a week, like you might, like millennials have very high levels of frequency that they prefer, but it's totally based on how they feel with the individual. Okay. The next one is Gen Xers. So when you're giving feedback to a Gen Xer, we Gen Xers are most interested in how this makes their life easier. So whenever you phrase whatever feedback you're going to give, point to how this makes their life easier. Okay. So even if it comes down to, from a selfish standpoint, just not having to deal with a crappy teammate, right? So how can whatever it is that you're asking them to do make their life easier long term? So it might be, um, I need you to be here at this meeting at a certain time and not be late, because if you're late, Josh is going to get mad at you, and then it's going to make your life a living hell. Does that make you, are you with me on this? So show them how their life is going to be easier. Um, the other big thing we find with Gen Xers is they're interested in consistency with other things that they've been told. So when Gen Xers get a lot of fluctuation on what they're being told, like for example, they have multiple managers that are giving them totally different information, they have a tendency to go rogue. And what I mean by this is they stop listening to what everybody else says, and they decide that I'm going to stop asking for permission and start asking for forgiveness. All right. So one, if you're gonna give a message down to your people, make sure that you are being consistent. And if it is inconsistent with what they have been told in the past, just identify it. Just say, I know this is different than how we've done this in the past, but this is the new procedure, or this is the new requirement or standard, or whatever it is. Just acknowledging that it's not been consistent will help them be more receptive to whatever the feedback is. Gen Xers have a tendency to have very low needs when it comes to feedback, unless it's positive. I mean, everybody wants an attaboy, right? But most Gen Xers have a tendency to be very no news is good news. So as long as things are rolling right along, they're usually okay, in a way that the next generation of millennials and Gen Zs are definitely not. So with millennials, you want to be as specific as possible. When you are giving feedback, you can't use generalities like, you're always late, because what'll happen is they'll pull up every single time that they weren't late and throw it in your face, right? You have to be very specific on what the changes are that you are looking for. Maybe even write these down for them. We definitely see that millennials like, and Gen Zs like for things to be in a record form, have a record of it. So as specific as possible. If you want them to change something, you need to tell them what specifically you want them to change. Is that more tedious? Yes. But remember, this is a generation that is used to syllabus and rubrics on how to do every single project before they get to you. So being specific will help. When you're just vague, when you say things like, it's just disrespectful, or it's just irresponsible. They don't know what that means. Like, what specifically do you want them to change? Right? So if you say, "Well, I just think you've been acting rude in meetings." What is it that they have done that makes it feel rude to you? Okay? Explain how the organization is affected. This is another thing that I've seen with giving feedback to millennials. On the whole, millennials seem to be interested in how their personal contribution affects the overall project. So sometimes when you're giving them feedback, if you start at the end project and then you work your way back on the lines that lead to where they are, and show how their one report influences these 5 things so that this can happen, they're much more receptive. They want to see that whatever they're doing makes a difference. So when you can show, start at the end and work your way back. So you might say, all right, we're gonna have a test flight on Friday. I'm just going to pull that one. Okay. We're going to have a test flight on Friday. In order for us to have that test flight on Friday, this manager needs to have this many reports completed and approved. And before they can do that, the reports have to get sent from this person, this person, and this person. And this person can't do their report until you give them this XYZ on your report, right? Show them how the linking together happens to the overarching goal. We definitely see that feedback needs to happen at a much higher frequency. I will agree with you. We have conditioned. Remember, this is our fault, not theirs. We have conditioned millennials and Gen Zs to not be as comfortable with receiving feedback. and some may cry. But what I will tell you is, who cares if they cried? It doesn't matter that they cry. You used to cry too. You just were smart enough to wait until you got into your car, right? So it's okay for people to be upset when they get negative feedback. You need to do it in a kind way, but it sometimes things just have to be said. You're going to have to fix it. If they want to stay, they're going to have to fix it. So do it in a kind way as much as possible using these things that I've told you. But man, if you don't give them any negative feedback ever, and then you sit down with them once a year and you tell them every single thing they've done wrong since February, they're going to freak out. Okay. So, what I have found is giving small doses of positive and negative feedback on the regular is going to be really, really important. I'm going to give you something that might help you in just a second on that. Okay. So what I would suggest when you are working with millennial generation, right now we're going to classify that from being from 35. Technically, it goes all the way down till about 15-year-olds. I hope you're not hiring 15-year-olds. That's totally illegal. Um, so those millennials want a much higher level. And so one of the things that I would suggest that you put together, you can do this either email or do it face to face. And it could be that you work out a rotation on who you manage on how to do this. But if you need them to start understanding how you evaluate what is excellent. Okay. So, what you can do is send an email that asks these sort of things. What you're asking them what they think. Okay. So, what went well this week? You want to know what they think went well this week. What didn't go well this week? How can I, as your manager, help you not have this problem next week? Right. In particular, you want younger generations to begin looking at how problems can get solved, what needs to be done. Not just let's not just sit around and talk about, oh, I've got a problem and this problem sucks and it's not fair that I have this problem. How can this be fixed? Right? So it could be that they need to take them off a project, or they need to potentially look at adding another subject matter expert in, make them start looking at what could actually solve the problems that they're having. Then you want to make sure in your part of the email you list what your goals are for them to next week. Overwhelmingly, we see millennials do better when they have about three hard goals that you want them to do. If you give them a list of 20 things, they will get completely overwhelmed and just watch Netflix instead. So, three hard things we seem to do better. What are your goals for them for the week? Make sure they know that. And then you want them to list their goals for the next week, including whatever their must do's are going to be. You want them to think every single week, what's doing this? What's your strategy to accomplish them? So all you're asking for here is, are they going to work on this one first, on this one on Tuesday, this one on Saturday at 1? You want them to start thinking out how they're going to accomplish next week's goals. And then this is a really big one. How will next week help move you forward to your monthly, yearly, and career goals? Have them thinking big picture. So, one of the big things that I hear from millennials quite frequently is they feel like there's no room for growth in whatever it is that they do. So, what we have to begin helping them understand is that every week is another opportunity for you to grow more and get farther and farther along on your path. So you need people thinking in this way. The power of a weekly check-in. You can do this virtually. You can do this face to face. You can rotate it in lots of different ways. For those of you, I will put up the link to this for you. If you want, I'll put it on the member site and on the ERC site so that you can take this and put it. But I've seen people put this like in a Google document. I'm not sure if all of you have Google stuff locked down, but like a Google Doc where you do this. But even if your young people are getting solid feedback and giving solid feedback once a month, that's still significantly better than doing it quarterly or doing it once a year. Okay. If y'all hear lots of bumping around, my two little boys are in trouble upstairs, and their bedroom is literally right above me. So that it's not thunder and it's not bombing for once here in Huntsville. All right. Use that. Okay, so let's do this idea of in the last little few minutes we want to do 3 easy tactics you can apply right away, okay? So the first thing I want you to do is planning out what you're going to say before you say it. And you can use this particular stretch to plan it out. So the first thing you need to identify is when blank happens, okay? When what happens, does it trigger a response, okay? Make sure you can identify. So when you're late or when you don't pay attention when you get out your cell phone during meetings, whatever it is, when blank happens, I feel blank. Okay. You must own your emotions towards whatever it is. So when you get out your cell phone at a meeting, I feel disrespected. Just own that. I feel, or it might be if same thing if it's late, or I feel embarrassed, right? When you don't, let's use you this one for example, when you don't spell check your memos before you send them out, I feel embarrassed. With me on that? You own your part of it. The impact to your work is whatever, right? So let's just stay with that same theme of misspellings. The impact to your work is people find you less credible and are less likely to listen to you on other things because you don't use spell check. Okay. So show them what their impact to their work is, and then be very clear on what you want them to do about it. Okay. So here's what I would like you to do. I would like you to uh, always spell check, and we'll check in about this in the next 2 weeks, right? Maybe you set a time period, or I would like you to, for the next 3 weeks, I would like for you to pre-submit something to me before you send it out to the whole company, whatever it is like that. If you can start using that sort of style of when blank happens, I feel blank, the impact to your work is blank. And so I would like you to blank, it is like the perfect layout for giving feedback. You can use this with your family also, right? Especially with your children. Make sure it's clear what the impact is to you and your relationship. So let's just use the jabber that's been happening on our house. When you don't put the dishes in the dishwasher, I feel like you're okay with me doing all the work around the house. The impact of this is I don't want to take you to the pool or do any of the fun things that you want to do. So I would like you to put the dishes in the dishwasher, please. See how that works? Right? It'll work on pretty much anything, but you really need to sit and think it out. And that's one of the big problems with feedback is we have a tendency to just knee jerk and say exactly what we think. But using those 4 questions or those 4 statements will help you. The next thing you can begin using is what's called a sandwich critique. Okay. So here's what you do. What you do is the first statement is to tell that person something good that you've observed. What we're going to do is give them a small dose of dopamine, basically. We're going to inflate their ego temporarily, okay, so that we can give them a little bit of a harder critique. All right. So here's something good that I've observed. Here's something that I've seen that needs improvement, right? And here's something else that I've seen good. Okay. We have seen that people are more likely to do this one here in the middle, the thing that needs improvement, when you bookend it with positive statements. So even if it's something like, I appreciate your hard work on the Johnson account. I did notice that there were 2 or 3 typos that need to be corrected in that. If you don't mind doing this, I know you're a great team player and that you're going to get this done for us, and we're gonna kill this Johnson account, right? So positive, something that needs improvement, positive. Work on sandwich critiquing. And then the last thing here is this idea of focusing on the problem and finding a solution together as much as possible. So when you do a lot of direct attacks on an individual, they're going to shut down. Anybody with any kind of sense is going to shut down. Okay. So you want to make sure that you're focusing on the problem itself, and be able to really clearly identify that. And what you can do is ask them very open endedly, where you say, what do you think we should do about this? Or if you were the manager, what would you do in this situation? Right? I'm open to hearing your responses. You want to make sure that you show that your partnership is committed towards making sure that you're successful. Okay? So focus on the problem and finding a solution. Draw that commitment line to you, right from the beginning. And I think that if you begin using these particular feedback methods both in your work and in your in your relationships, you're going to find a much calmer peace, right? Because it won't be so much about running off of feelings. Our problem is that many times we let an adrenaline rush come in and have us say all kinds of stupid things. So really being intentional about stepping back and planning things is going to help you significantly. All right. So that's my main tips for you on how to deliver better feedback. Um, I've got a little time here on the chat box. If you have some questions about how you maybe can approach feedback, I don't necessarily can't necessarily fix your particular weird person, but I can definitely tell you maybe some different things that you can use. But I hope that this has helped you. Remember that you can go to the Gen Y Communications or the GenY.com page and log into the members area or the ERC to see a video of this. Again, if you want, there's resource, and then there's all kinds of, if this is one of your first ones that you've gone to, you can go to either the member site or the ERC site and log in quite easily, and be able to go back and see all the other soft skill webinars available. So all right, giving you feedback. It's a hard one to do, but you absolutely can do it. If you have some questions, let me know. Otherwise, I have enjoyed my time with you. Please, please promise me you'll stay safe, wash your hands, don't go out unless you absolutely have to. I just appreciate you guys wanting to learn and grow yourselves as individuals and managers. And I hope you have an awesome day. Thanks, guys. Thanks for the positive feedback. I will see you in August, you guys. I'm not sure which one it is, but it'll be awesome, I promise. You don't have to apply at all, just a little bit at a time. You'll still be doing better. You can always email me questions directly too if you want to. Kristen at GenY.com. I'll put that in here. Kristen at GenY.com. Thanks, Terry. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Harmony. Thanks, Cesario. Appreciate your positive feedback. All right, everybody. If nobody's got any questions, if you do have questions, you can send them to me, and I of course, will always answer. All right. Well, if that's it, have a great day, guys.